And welcome back to Age of Empires 2, Definitive Edition History Lessons. Today we're continuing with naval warfare. The need for warships in the Mediterranean Sea largely faded after the Romans gained complete control of the surrounding lands. There was no other empire with a navy to offer competition, and piracy was all but eliminated. Following the collapse of Western Roman Empire, new civilizations sprang up from the ruins of the empire, and piracy reappeared. Warships were needed again to defend against invasion, project military power, and protect sea trade routes. Byzantine ships. The Byzantines were the great Mediterranean naval power of the early Middle Ages. Naval power was critical to their survival and their extended empire. The land defenses of Constantinople were excellent and made outright assault of the city very difficult, but the city had to keep its sea supply open to prevent a successful siege. So long as the Navy could bring in supplies, the Navy was assured survival. The main Byzantine warship of the early Middle Ages was the dromin, an evolution of the ancient oared warships, such as the trireme. Typical dromin was long and narrow for speed. Power was supplied by 50 to 200 rowers and latent sails. A mast was placed in the middle of the front half and rear half of the ship. The dromin carried a beak at the bow for pinning the enemy vessels prior to boarding. Bow, I think. Rams were rarely seen. Platforms were built in the center bow and stern. From these platforms, archers and catapults could fire at enemy ships and crews. A typical battle involved attempts to ram or disable enemy ships, then grappling and boarding by marines. The Byzantines effectively used a secret weapon called Greek fire. This was a mixture of chemicals that burned fiercely upon contact with air. It was pumped out of hoses against enemy ships or thrown in bombs. It was a devastating weapon against wooden ships and decisive for the Byzantine in their naval battles against the Arabs. The secret of Greek fire was so important and so closely guarded that it was eventually lost, and we do not know today exactly what it was. Mediterranean ships. Oar-powered warships called galleys remained the principal warships of the Mediterranean beyond the end of the Middle Ages because the waters were relatively protected from fierce gales. At the same time, the Italian city-states of Genoa and Venice gradually became naval powers in proportion to the increasing importance of their trade with the Levant. The Arabs also built navies to influence trade and support their conflict with the Byzantines and other Christians for control of the Mediterranean. The beginning of the Crusades in the 11th century brought ships from the northern Europe, and that had involved very different designs. European ships. The Germanic tribes that occupied northern Europe around 500 developed several new ship types. The typical trading ship was wide-bodied and of deep draft. It mounted a single mast at first, and later more as it grew in size. The Norse called this type of ship Nar. We know a lot about this ship today because one was recovered from the bottom of a harbor in Denmark in the 1960s. Much of the trade and exploration of the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings was carried out in this type of ship. It evolved into a cog, the principal merchant ship of the later Middle Ages. This deep draft ship was designed for easy sailing and high cargo capacity. Ship fighting in northern Europe was mainly an extension of land combat. Towers were built on the bow and stern of the cog for protection, and as firing platforms for archers. Crews fired at each other with arrows as they closed, but the intent was only to disable the enemy crewmen and soldiers. Ships came together and attempted to capture each other in hand-to-hand combat. Sailing ships in these waters had no ability to ram. There was no weapon with which to do great structural damage to another ship or sink it until cannon appeared in the 14th century. Some 400 English and French cog-type warships carrying large contingents of archers and foot soldiers engaged in the naval battle of Sluys in 1340, typical of the later Middle Ages. They simply jammed together for archery fire and close combat. I'll be back next time with the Middle Ages.